Welcome to Taking Your Third Path, where courageous stories and hard-won wisdom guide us towards lives of intention, connection, and care.
Hi, everybody. On today's episode of Taking Your Third Path podcast, we're talking to Nate and Robin Lewis, and we'll be taking a deep dive into how to push back at communication overload. Too many emails, IMEMs, meetings, all that stuff that gets in the way of us actually having time to get our work done. A long time ago, I learned that Nate was an expert around these issues. It also turns out his wife, Robin, has a few tricks of her own. So, welcome, Nate. I'm so glad you're here. And, I want to tell that story about how you've taught me something so many years ago where you were trying to figure out how to make sure you could, kind of bring your most valued self to work, what you were hired to do. And you realized that sometimes that meant you had to go hide in an office somewhere
Mhm.
and maybe take 2 hours for uninterrupted work time so you could think and plan, and that you really learned that you were doing your organizations a favor to create that quiet, focused work time. Do you remember that? And what is that something you
Yeah.
still practice today?
Yes, it is still something that I do today. I have found that I needed what I call think time to really help me understand and frame a problem, allow myself to do my own analysis and inform my own opinions if I was going to be most effective in ultimately leading or being a part of the meeting. And I always felt that if I had been invited to the meeting, I was expected to share my own beliefs about the topic. And so, very early in my career, I found for me to be effective, I needed to have my own think time. And that's where I do that type of thinking.
Yeah. And you and I were talking about how, you know, along came the pandemic and suddenly we were all working remotely. And sometimes that meant that we, for a little while, could kind of have that uninterrupted time because we were working remotely. But I think you were even telling me that even working remotely, our days can get chopped up and that think time can disappear. So I know sometimes you work remotely, sometimes you work on site. Have you learned how to do that well in either setting?
Well, I still believe it comes down to you controlling your work day and your work time. There will always be people wanting to make demands and they want their answers quickly, and that gets back to the whole, two by two matrix of urgent and important. And what I learned during the pandemic, when everything was virtual and IMs and emails and texts were just all popping up at random times, was that it became even more important for me to control some of my time to allow me to have uninterrupted thought.
Yeah.
And so I used the concept of think time as much during the pandemic as before or after.
Yeah, yeah, that's great. So it's really about understanding that controlling your calendar is something that
Yeah.
the organization benefits from because they want the best from you. And that means having some time to actually think and plan. Wonderful. Well, there was another example. We're going to get to Robin in a second, but there was another example where you also pushed back at meetings because you realized in one meeting that you were in, there was an awful lot of people at that meeting. And did it make sense? Was everybody using their best time to have so many people there at that meeting? And you stood up and said, "Hey, this costs my organization a lot of money to, our organization a lot of money to have this meeting. Is this the best use of our time?" And I know you said that it's your culture that encourages people to say this, but it takes some courage to say something like that too.
Mhm.
Do you remember that time? And is that something that
Yeah.
happens frequently? And or how do you get people to really step up and say, "Let's make sure meetings don't take up too much of our time"? What have you learned around that?
Well, I think part of it starts with understanding the intent of the meeting. I think oftentimes, or what I was seeing kind of in the example that you shared, was that we were starting to use the meeting for information sharing at the same time as when we also needed to make a decision. And kind of in the spirit of inclusive leadership, there were a lot more people at this meeting than what was needed to make the decision. And because of all those additional people and perspectives and encouraging people to share their perspectives, it was making getting to a decision that much harder. And so, I think that's something people need to learn is that you can still be an inclusive leader without inviting everyone to everything.
In fact, you probably are going to do everybody a favor to be more selective about who comes, what the purpose is, and to have that very intentional thinking before that you've done during your thinking time so you can plan
That's right.
that good meeting.
Right.
Wonderful, wonderful. Well, I got to get to speak with Robin about some of these issues. And Robin, you use a term called sacred time. I think that really nails it. Tell me more about sacred time. What is that? Where does that look like for you and your team?
Yeah, so I've always led big virtual teams. And so while Nate uses the term think time, I use sacred time. And it's really time for me to just have uninterrupted time, whether it's to reorganize my calendar, respond to emails, think about upcoming meeting agendas and who needs to be there. Is it something we need to make a decision on? Is it something that we need feedback on, and being really clear in that. So the sacred time is, I look at it as my uninterrupted time, but I'm also really transparent with it. I would let my administrative assistant know, my boss know, my team know, this is the time for me to get my thoughts together on things and do maybe project work or other things that needed to be done. And so trying to have that uninterrupted time. But I think as importantly as that too is I also try to have time in my calendar where it's almost like um, office hours time, if you will, especially with a virtual team, because you need to have time where folks can reach out to you easier, or they know this is the best time to reach me. Not that you're not going to respond on other off times, but having that time where folks know, hey, this is going to be the 2 hour period or whatever it is, can really make you more efficient in how you manage your calendar, especially when you've got people in different time zones and trying to reach out from all over. So that's how I try to manage sacred time and office hours time.
Yeah, no, it's really the theme we're hearing is intentionality. So it's the
Mhm.
idea that to do our best work, sometimes we really actually need to be disengaged with everybody else so we can focus on our work. And but also to do work well, we need to be connected to do our work well. And one way to do that is those office hours. But you have another technique that I think probably makes the office hours more impactful. You're very intentional in your remote teams to build camaraderie, to build connection. You do, sounds like you do that in a few different ways, but one way is inside meetings. What does that look like to build connection so people have more sense of who they are and who they are as a group? Tell us what you do.
Yeah, I mean, that is an important part of the team culture. I think really critical when you're leading virtual teams, but almost like team standards for how you're going to operate in meetings and getting everyone on the same page so that everyone's trying to approach it universally in a similar way across the team. But that then inherently becomes part of the team culture. So when it comes to leading meetings, we're disciplined about roles and having a timekeeper, really staying on track with time. I think that is one of the biggest killers of efficiency throughout the day is when you're not staying on time and disciplined. And it's easy to get off track, especially in a virtual world where a lot of things are going on. But also part of that culture is trying to weave the fun into the meetings too, starting out with something lighter before you jump right into really heavy business topics can be a good way to get creative juices flowing and to get everybody engaged and just being mindful of pulling people in, everybody on the team in during virtual team meetings because it's easy to kind of sit back and take a back seat. So that then becomes part of how we operate from a culture standpoint when we're leading virtual teams too.
Yeah, no, I mean, really, I think for virtual teams to work well, what you're describing is essential, you know? And I think people stumbled into it with the pandemic. But what you're saying is, no, no, no. This is a core piece of creating a successful virtual team is building that camaraderie very intentionally, For example, starting meetings in this kind of more fun way. And we do that too at Third Path. We've been doing it where we've been virtual for 26 years. And we knew an important part of creating trust in a group was having that kind of connection time that would happen inside of meetings. Well, so culture is important, clearly. Nate's talked about how culture made it safe for him to stand up at a meeting and say, hey, maybe we should be doing this way. You've been talking about how you built culture right from the start with strong team connections and a virtual team experience. But I'm curious, someone listening in today might be in an organization that's not so supportive. Nate, are there things that people can do, even if they're not in a supportive culture, to kind of control their calendar, as you said, or to kind of shape their week so that they're feeling more effective and not having everything take over their work time? What have you learned that someone could do would help them no matter what culture they're in?
Well, I think part of this is about establishing your own standards, holding yourself to kind of a performance standard that you can be proud of, and setting goals. And so one of the things that I've done for many years is I've journaled. Okay. And I've always felt that it was important for me to get closure at the end of the week to reflect on what got accomplished, what do I expect to accomplish for the coming week, and what didn't get accomplished that now may roll into the following week. And when you do that on an ongoing basis, it allows you to reassess your own capacity and be somewhat introspective as to why things didn't get done, and was that a function of me or a function of my organization, and develop some corrective actions. And so I've done that for 20 plus years. It's always allowed me to get to closure on a Friday, allow me to disconnect. Was that's what prompted me to start doing this. Uh, it's like putting down a book and then picking it up a few days later and remembering where you left off. And so I always have found that really beneficial for me. And through the years, I think it allowed me to better establish my own performance standards because of the self-reflection and the looking back.
Yeah, I think it's such a great example. And we have a little slightly different way we do it at Third Path, but it's taking some regular time to say, here's what's on my list. Here's
Mhm.
what I did or didn't do, and what do I learn about why I was able to move forward on so- those more important things, or did some of those less important things take up all my time, and what do I
Right.
want to do about it if that's the way my week went, or my 2 week. In our case, we do it every 2 weeks. So yeah, it sounds like there's something people can do right away. And Robin, I want to hear from you if you have an extra thought about that, of something someone can take today and start having more control over their calendar. And then after we hear from Robin, you're going to hear that the reason why Nate and Robin are so smart about all these things and why their organizations are benefiting from all these things, it's not just because they want to be great workers, it's because they also want to be great parents. And so they were trying to think about, how do I do work in a way so I have plenty of time for that other important part of my life, which is to be a great parent. So, Robin, what else can someone do, no matter what culture they're in, that will help them control communication overload?
Yeah, I think regardless of the culture, and especially maybe if it's a more difficult culture or you have a supervisor who maybe isn't modeling what you would love, I think then it's on you to have the courage to model what you would expect or what you would want. And that can be easier said than done, especially in different cultures. But I think it's a critical aspect to creating change, driving change. And so I think there are very practical ways to do that, especially if it comes to meeting discipline. I know there have been a couple times where I've just tried to model what I would want, regardless of how my supervisors have approached it. So it comes down to being deliberate with meeting agendas ahead of time. What are we trying to accomplish? Keeping the meetings efficient, and especially, the meetings I'm leading where perhaps my supervisor would be invited or others. And I think as you chip away at that and model it, others see that and want to start to emulate that. And I know for our kids too. And Nate and I are always, they come home from work and they often share examples with us of what went well and what didn't go so well. Oftentimes it's a phone call where they're really frustrated about something now that they're in these professional roles. And I always say, sometimes you learn more from a situation that's really difficult, or a boss who maybe doesn't approach things the way you would approach things. And so take that as a gift. You learn just as much from somebody who maybe isn't doing it the way you would want things to be done. And then that's an opportunity for you to do it differently, model it differently.
Mm-hmm.
So I think Nate and I are always having those conversations with our kids. It becomes very real now that they're adults in a professional world.
Yeah, no, that's really, really smart. Simple things like starting the meeting on time, ending the meeting when you said you were going to end the meeting. Those little kinds of reinforcements every time you're in charge of a meeting. And like you said, getting an agenda out ahead of time. These are all very much in our control. And I think you're 100% right that when people see you doing it, they're like, huh, that looks like it might actually work pretty well to do it this way. I'm relieved.
And even on the agenda, on the various topics, I would be very deliberate. This one, I'm looking for feedback. This one, we're making a decision, and this is who owns the decision. This one is an inform, so that we're not slipping backward. And once we've made a decision, we're not going back and revisiting decisions. And I think the more you do that, it does build that culture, and then others start to see that and hopefully start to do those things as well. And they help you have just a more efficient team.
And you're reminding me, your version of next step two was to kind of leave the meeting and you would put some letters on the meeting notes that you had taken of an A for an action you needed to take, or number one, if this was a top priority thing. So again, you both have been learning, I want time to do work well. I want time for parenting because I really want to be a great parent. And so that's one of the reasons why I got you guys to be on this call today, because you're really at a point in your career, Nate, where you said, I want to pay it forward. I want to help others think about how they can do work and life and claim both as something they're doing well in their lives.
Mm-hmm.
So tell me more. How did you know that that was important to you? What are some lessons you learned to, Nate, when you think back, your kids are young adults, but when you think back about those decisions to prioritize work and family, what really helped you? What guided you?
Well, I think this is was definitely influenced by both Robin and I talking about the level of involvement we wanted to have as parents, and we wanted to participate with our kids as they grew up and be active in their activities with them or around them. And at the same time, we both felt like we could have very fulfilling careers. It didn't need to be one or the other. It was more about how do we achieve both for both of us. And I think that's what influenced us. And so I think it became really important to share the responsibilities at home as well as share the responsibilities, even though we're in different jobs in different companies, but essentially sharing the professional responsibilities as well to allow each of us to, advance in our careers and be active as parents. And
Yeah.
now it's about being active as grandparents. I mean, it doesn't stop. It just goes to another, phase.
Yeah, yeah, we've really learned something at Third Path. These skills that you guys are talking about are skills we use across the life cycle. And so it is definitely, whether it's children, aging parents, grandparenting, phasing into retirement, there's going to be things we keep on doing, work and something else.
I think that it's important as a working parent, when you're trying to juggle all of these things, that you're not beating yourself up over it. Just accepting the fact that you can't be everything to everyone all the time. And it's okay to make trade-off decisions, and doing that hopefully in an environment where you're talking and working it out together. But I think whether you're a working mom or a working dad, you can feel a lot of guilt. I can't be the one that's helping in the homeroom, or I want to be the parent that goes every Tuesday afternoon, but I can't. My work schedule won't allow it. But finding other ways to get that fulfillment and help. Maybe it's engaging with the teacher. How can I help even though I can't be in the classroom? And sometimes they'll send things home or they'll mail you things to work on. There's other ways, I think, to really be a supportive parent. And it may not always be obvious, but exploring those different things, and again, not beating each other up or beating yourself up when you feel like I'm the one that's giving up on things. So I
Yeah,
think just having those respectful conversations is really important.
absolutely. And I want to go back to something you guys do with, you don't even know you're doing it, but you guys do it so well. Because to me, I think those conversations of ability to think outside the box about how to make it all work is because you guys came together with a lot of clarity as a couple. So you both had similar goals around your work and life um, aspirations. And therefore, when you face those tougher choices, you could use each other to say, hey, how does this fit into our common aspirations? In fact, Nate, you've talked about how, you know, when you think about playing it forward, if someone's in an organization where it's not really aligned with their work and life goals, you had some strong ideas about what they might want to think about. Tell me more about what you've learned around a couple getting on the same page and what to do when they're up against something that might not be exactly aligned with that. What can couples do? What can a person do?
Well, I think sometimes people let success be defined by others, whether that be their company, whether that be other members of the family, and uh, or even just society sometimes will put forward depictions of what success may look like. And I think, you've got to answer that for yourself. What is important for me to be successful at work as I define it, and what is important for me to be successful as a parent. And I think the more that you understand for yourself what you hold as important, you become much better at seeing the tension that may come from another organization's definition of success, and frankly feel more confident in yourself on pushing back or deciding to go a different way.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it becomes important to hopefully have a partner that understands that and engages in that discussion with you. Because those can be hard discussions because you start to get some self-doubt and, sometimes you need reinforcement.
Yeah, yeah, no, I think a great example, you might guys have another one since then, but a great example you talked about was, the opportunity to work overseas, and that
Mm.
came your way, and having a partner who can think with you about that and say, is this the right choice? Is this a choice right now? Um, does that ring a bell, Robin? And any thoughts about how couples can support each other to stay on track with their work and life goals?
Yeah, I mean, we've definitely been faced with that, and Nate's had multiple opportunities to go overseas, and I think we've both had opportunities to do other things that would require different kinds of travel, and one person having to maybe give things up. But I just think for us, it really came down to communication and realizing that while while that opportunity overseas or the promotion at a different location might sound like a really neat thing to do at that time, if it's not what's best for the family and that's your North Star, then getting comfortable with that and realizing, and it's, I think we both have a lot of hindsight now. We can look back and say, okay, it all did work out or is still working out. But as you continue to perform and work hard, other opportunities do come forward to do interesting work and new things. And it might not always be so obvious at the time, but having those clear lines of communication with each other and realizing, I mean, for us, it was we both wanted to be successful, and we kind of realized it is a give and a take. And for us to juggle two careers, we realized we can't just follow one thing all the time. So, and Nate probably has definitely thoughts on that
Mhm.
too, as he's given up opportunities to work overseas too. But I think that's what it came down to for us is realizing that um, there will be other things at some point. It may not be obvious right there at the time.
Yeah,
Mhm.
no, I mean, I think we were talking about communication overload, you guys, but look at what we really landed at. What we landed at was when in a two-family system, both parents kind of have a similar idea about what they're reaching for. It helps them navigate those bigger decisions, and it also helps them navigate all those things you just talked about, how to be smart at work so you have plenty of time for family. So I knew this was going to be a terrific conversation, Nate and Robin. Thank you so much. These are great insights on how you can control your calendar and make more time for your life. So stay tuned. We'll show you some ways you can apply these ideas when taking your third path. Hi again. For those of you who are looking for some important takeaways from this month's podcast about communication overload, Melissa and I are going to do that right now. Our guests were Nate and Robin Lewis, and they are great examples of people who have put both the theory and practice into play of communication overload. What do I mean by that? They've got lots of tips around how to avoid communication overload. And they kept on practicing it over the course of their careers. And what you really learn, and this is the why, is it meant that they both became really skilled around how to do work in a way where they had plenty of time for life. And what you can see when Robin and Nate are talking about this, it helped them as a family system then work together to figure out how to prioritize what was most important, their relationships to each other, their relationships to kids, while doing also a great job at work. So, we're going to talk a lot about what we learned from this incredible conversation with Nate and Robin. And the first thing I want to have Melissa talk about is each method of communication has a different purpose. And you really learn listening to Nate and Robin that if we're smart and intentional, we use those methods purposefully and intentionally. What have you taken away from these different methods of communication, Melissa?
Well, I loved when Robin was talking about meeting effectiveness, and she was really clear about the way they set up their agendas and what is each item purposeful for, and who really needs to be at the meeting and who doesn't need to be at the meeting, and making sure things are timed properly. That's all. Meetings play so much into communication. It is one communication method, and I think it's one that can really eat up a lot of time and take away from work effectiveness. So I loved that tip that she gave about how to really leverage good planning tools and good meeting execution.
Yeah, yeah. And there's more because, she also gave a tip about the importance of creating trust and connection in meetings. But what was so fun when you and I were planning for this takeaway call was how much email and IM have a very different purpose. Tell us a little bit about that.
So, I think it varies from organization to organization. And I think it's a really important point to be purposeful about the way these different modes of communication are used. So I think just knowing this is what we use email for, this is what we use instant messaging for. I think the more modes of communication you have, the more you can get distracted by them. So I think this is a situation where less is more. We happen to not use Slack or any other kind of instant messaging. We happen to use text. And so I think one thing that we do at Third Path is do a really good job of being intentional about what we use different communications for. I think any good organization really can hone in on that and be very effective that way.
Yeah. So we've learned, for example, email is awesome because it's asynchronous. And so it means that, I can send an email. Sometimes I do on a weekend, but you guys know you do not need to respond on a weekend. For me, I'm just catching up on something, and I'm a little bit episodic overwork, and that's a good time for me to catch up. But there's a real clarity that it's asynchronous. I'm sending it, you don't have to respond. I know people use other methods, but the point is it can be really intentional that it's asynchronous. Whereas instant messaging, the idea is, hey, I'm reaching out because there's something I need from you quickly. Now, if you're suddenly getting instant messaging nights and weekends, or expected to do email on nights and weekends, that's a very different story. So each method of communication can be used very intentionally and very differently and with a real successful purpose if there's transparency around those norms in the workplace. Hey, there's a lot of other things that we've been doing at Third Path where we practice what we preach. I mentioned news and goods at meetings. What are some other things that you saw Nate and Robin talk about, or things that we do at Third Path to kind of be smarter about avoiding communication overload?
So Nate was talking about journaling and what a great practice that's been for him over decades and a really successful career. So I was thinking about that as sort of communication with oneself, which is so important. We have a similar process that we use at Third Path that goes a little bit further beyond journaling, although I don't know the details of what Nate puts in his journal. But our tools specifically, we use a biweekly update. There are 3 sections to it where we're able to update what have I accomplished in the last couple of weeks, which is a really nice reflection opportunity. And then to share in a more narrative way. So what's going on right now? What do I need to plan for both in work and in life? And then we use our work life score. So we are able to assess, am I doing okay? Am I not doing okay? Like, am I way over capacity? Or am I fine? Or do I have space for more? And the big key about that tool is that's how we communicate with you as a leader in the organization to say, hey, this is what I'm doing. So it's more than just what happens personally. It's again a very transparent means of communication and connection.
Yeah. Yeah. And what another parallel between what Nate does with his journaling and what we do in our biweekly updates is because we're encouraged to reflect every 2 weeks, we find efficiencies and what we're doing, or we find what's taking up too much of our time that we shouldn't be spending so much time on. And so it just becomes a very good way, like you said, for self-reflection, and then transparent communication with me, including the section where it's kind of what's around the corner, both work and life, so that I can have a sense of how people are doing. Um, and to me, it's really become this very powerful way if we want to be an organization that supports people to be really effective at work and have time and energy for their lives outside of work. I just love our biweekly update. Lots and lots more we could say about that. It's been a really, really powerful tool that we use at Third Path. I was really impressed when we were talking about this in our staff meeting. There was a number of other fun things that we kind of hit on. Obviously, we use quiet time at Third Path. We're very intentional. In fact, part of our biweekly update is to say, hey, do you know when your quiet time is? I happen to take mine on Mondays. Um, Another thing we were talking about when we were talking about this as staff is we're encouraged to experiment and tried something. In fact, even in our biweekly update, we could say, I'm trying to be more intentional about X, and I'm going to see how this goes for the next few weeks. um, I heard us talk about this idea of setting timers. I love that people on our team this do this. It's the concept that, hey, I'm going to spend 30 minutes on this task, and I'm going to really try to stick to that, and then when the timer goes off, I'm going to move on to something else. There was one other fun thing that I heard us talk about as a team of how we practice some of these ideas, um, where, sometimes you'll work on something, um, and it's, uh, you'd start your day with kind of more of a low-hanging fruit so that you can kind of get your juices flowing, and get to that more important work. Again, I think all of this is different than necessarily communication overload, but the point of communication overload is that we don't work very effectively if all of our time is taken up in meetings, all of our time is doing emails or responding to IM. And so, what the benefit to organizations for thinking about avoiding communication overload is you start encouraging a team to think about how to use their time more effectively at work. I'm going to flip the tables here. There's a last subject I want to talk about, which is what leaders can do. But Melissa, you're great at thinking about how some of those things can apply to home as well. So we're learning some skills around communication overload, and they can apply at home. What have you learned around some of how these things play out at home too?
So we haven't talked at all about boundary setting yet. And I think this piece about boundary setting is so important that, again, because I understand what the work norms are, I can decide that it's okay for me to put my phone down at dinner time and know that there's no critical thing that's happening. Or if there is something critical, I knew ahead and I knew I was going to have to make a change to my personal practice around boundary setting. But I think part of what happens with communications and communication overload, the way work can spill into personal life is really important to pay attention to. So I could have the best of intentions at home on how I'm going to set boundaries and how I'm going to really be attentive to what I'm doing communication wise. When work becomes, when we get into more chronic work overload as opposed to episodic, then you're really finding yourself pulled away from personal time that is important connection time at home. I will say one other thing. I think that when we are in this mode of both synchronous and asynchronous communication with work, it's actually a really it can really get in the way of practicing good boundary setting, just as far as my phone is like an appendage. And while I have this excuse, I have to check my phone all the time because it could be work and I have to be on call, that we almost can use it as an excuse to not set boundaries and not have a healthy relationship with our devices, which I think is a whole other topic for a different day.
Yeah.
Boundary setting. And if it's not working to do boundary setting, what experiments, we talked about experimenting at work, what experiments can you also do at home to set boundaries on how you're communicating either with work or with your family members?
Yeah. Yeah. No, actually, you're getting at something that I hadn't really, it's so obvious when I say this. I hope that you know that you don't have to check your phone for third path work, not just nights, but all weekend. Like that's really what our norm is we really have a norm. I hope that we can say work is done. Now I'm focused on family. Um, and what you're really making me think about is, how much our work cultures influence our ability to set limits around what we're doing at home. And that's again back to what Nate and Robin were talking about is they wanted time for their lives. And so they wanted to put these ideas in practice because they wanted success at work and time for the people that they love. So I know that you were talking when we were in a staff meeting about, when we were thinking about this, that you guys were really good as a family system of, hey, no technology at the table. That's not just good for you, what kind of role modeling you're doing for your kids. Can you talk more about that and how that's had an impact on your time together as a family?
Sure. I love talking about this because it's always a work in progress, but I feel like we are relying so much on devices, both for communication and for connection. And if I'm spending so much time buried in my phone trying to communicate and connect with others, then I'm not communicating and connecting with my kids and my husband. And I think it's very important for us. You're literally demonstrating you are important to me. Our time together is important. And that's a value that I have. That's a priority that we have in our house. And so I think we're sharing with our kids. It's not I do find myself sometimes like, hey, I'm asking you to please get off of your device right now. And I literally have my face in mind because I'm doing a crossword puzzle. I'm doing something. I'm doing something that I have an excuse for. It is clearly much more effective. And you feel valued when you feel heard. And this is not making eye contact with somebody. And actually, even if it's not eye contact, just giving somebody your undivided attention. I think that's a huge part of successful communication is feeling heard, knowing you've been heard, being validated. I once heard somebody say, listening is loving. And I
Mm,
think it even applies at work that just listening is respect. We it's such an important means of connection with other people. And so I think, considering when I'm communicating, what am I trying to do?
yeah.
There's a
Yeah.
lot of intentionality behind it.
Wonderful, wonderful. Well, one last takeaway for us to think about together, and then I want to hear your last thoughts. So we've talked about what an employee can do, no matter what culture they're in. We've talked about what you can do at home and how they're connected. And so the more we get smart about this, like Nate and Robin did, the more positive outcomes we can have at home. I guess where I want to go last is what can leaders do? And so I want to talk a little bit about something I've done personally as a leader and see if there's anything you want to add to it. I do think role modeling is so important. And so to me, the reason why we have really clear boundaries around not working nights and weekends is because I really believe that we will be better at work because we are more intentional about I'm working now and I'm going to do it effectively, and then I'm not working. And that when we go away from work, we come back recharged, you know? And so to me, I know that during periods of episodic overwork, I do end up working hours that I don't want anybody else to work. But I think because I've been so clear in my messaging, I hope that there's this very still clear that nobody else is expected to do that. And I think that's what role modeling as a leader does, is that you can still then veer off, but you've been very clear that the expectation is for the team to do it differently. I'm even remembering a recent time where you and I connected because we were both getting to episodic overwork. And you sent me a great email and you said, "Hey, I know we've had to do X and it's a little bit different than we normally do it. I'm hoping we can get back to the normal." And that was so great. So we've built enough trust and belief in these systems that we can then talk to each other when we're feeling like we're kind of getting out of the range of comfort around our norms and our approaches. How much is that sounding familiar to you? What would you like to add about what leaders can do?
Well, I think what leaders can do, obviously, like the goal is walk the talk. I think when you can't, for whatever reason, then the next piece is be very clear. Even though you've said in the past, I'm not saying you, Jessica, I mean, a leader generally has said, oh, we don't work nights and weekends. When you're off, you're off. But as a leader, you're finding yourself needing to just get something off of your mind. You've got to just get some extra work done. You can be very clear in any communication you send that is, hey, don't read this till Monday. Like put that in the email subject because and be able to say, and I think you do this beautifully. Hey, sorry for the weekend email. This is why I'm doing this. So it's very clear that the expectation has not suddenly shifted for us outside of a norm. So I think that's important to be very transparent. And I think the other thing a leader can do is kind of monitor if I suddenly, as one of your team members, start doing a whole bunch of emailing on the weekends and in off hours, it's an opportunity for a leader to see a pattern and to call out that pattern and just to check in, hey, I've noticed, help me understand what's going on. Maybe for me, work feels good because I need some distraction over something that's going on in my personal life. But maybe you don't realize as a leader that you've put a bunch of pressure on your team. And now the team members who normally are able to set boundaries and feel good about stepping away don't feel okay with that anymore.
Yeah. Yeah. And again, back to that wonderful biweekly update. I can watch people's scores slowly increase if they're feeling like they're overwhelmed, either on work or life, because that both can be impacting us. And I have to pay attention to that and then kind of reach out to somebody or pay attention to suddenly getting more emails on a weekend from somebody. Wonderful. Great advice. Okay, so much we can do around how to avoid communication overload. Any last thoughts before I share my last thought?
You know, my last thoughts are almost always around intentionality. And this is just another example of how being clear about what communication modes we're using, being clear what they are, and being intentional about how they're used, I think that really saves a lot of headache and a lot of confusion and allows for better efficiency in communication.
Yeah, intentionality makes a really good skill to always practice. In fact, when I tell you what my takeaway is, um, it's amazing how what I really loved, and I said this at the start, was how much Nate and Robin both developing these skills created a happier home life. And speaking of intentionality, there's never a point in time when you're not sharpening and continuing to monitor and strengthen those skills. So we're at a very different point in home life where my husband's now retired. And I noticed that he's kind of a little bit more, in his phone sometimes because he doesn't have this kind of work life boundary. And so, there's been times at dinner where I'm like, hey, honey, is that important? So you never stop practicing, being intentional about when you can communicate effectively and when to put it aside and be present with the people and communicate real time with those people. So wonderful. Hey, if you're looking for some more resources, check out our blog post. And on our website's free resource page, you'll find our communication overload survey. Sure, you'll find lots of insights from that as well. Thanks for listening in and keep taking your third path.